every single run of that block of testing was faster with the TMDs installed. We had developed a product a lot like our chain damper, which we'll talk about later, that smooths out these kind of energy peaks. I wanted this kind of thing on my bike to see if I could make the bike less rowdy when I pushed the bike harder.
If you blind tested me with the device in and the device out, I'm pretty confident I could have told you every run what I was riding.
If I can make the bike feel like it's going slower when I'm going faster, I love that.
Tuned mass dampers, the next leap in mountain bike performance, or snake oil? Well, Rimpact have done their homework. Join us as we dig into this fascinating technology. As always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel so that we can keep bringing you more great episodes. All right, on with the show. Let's start with the product that I think most people are going to be super interested in at the moment, and that's the tuned mass damper, or TMD. It's been seen a lot over the last season or so on the World Cup circuit, and there's been a lot of talk about it and a lot of interest in it. But how did the mass damper kind of come to your attention in the first place?
Packing inserts into boxes can be quite boring. I was watching some YouTube at the time, back in 2020, I think it was. A video popped up talking about Formula One technology, banned Formula One technology specifically. I'm sure some other Formula One fans at home have watched this very specific video. And it brought the tuned mass damper that was used in Formula One back in 2005, 2006 to my attention. They would, specifically the Renault team, would fit some sort of mass damper to the nose of the car and gain significant timed benefits from the stability that it would provide the nose of the car. The cars were able to hit curbs more aggressively and bring the nose down to a more stable position quicker, so the aerodynamics could kick in and provide traction and grip and accelerate out of corners quicker. That sounded really cool to me. Love F1, and I thought I want that for my bike. So a secondary passion project that never intended to be a product for bikes kicked off. After discussing it with my colleague at the time, I wanted this kind of thing on my bike to see if I could make the bike less rowdy when I pushed the bike harder. I'm very much a confidence-based rider, so the more confident I am, the faster I go, probably to a fault. But if I can make the bike feel like it's going slower when I'm going faster, I love that. So that's how the project kicked off. And it wasn't until 2 years later, because we were definitely doing this in our own free time after work and kind of like towards the end of days, we started to find we were gaining some very real benefits from putting these prototypes on our bikes. And we decided that we needed to make this a real thing and give it to other people as well.
Yeah.
So 4 years on, it's now available to buy, and the feedback we're getting from it is fantastic. So
that's awesome.
Really
you've been on it for quite a while.
Stash Space Rails is the ultimate way to store your bikes. You can get more bikes into less space. It's really easy to fit, it's really easy to use, get to whatever bike you want exactly when you need it. Downtime viewers get 10% off their entire order by heading to stashproducts.co.uk/downtime and using the code downtime, all in capitals, at the checkout. Upgrade your bike storage today.
Can you explain how the technology works?
Yeah. So a conventional tuned mass damper is a device that oscillates at a given frequency. And you install that into a greater system, whether that be a building, a ship, a rocket, a tool, etc., a Formula One car. And that frequency is something that is a negative thing if the greater system oscillates at that frequency. It like falls apart or loses accuracy, etc. So you can tune a tuned mass damper, hence the T in the name, to that given frequency, and it kind of cancels that out. So you get less oscillations at that.
So it basically vibrates in antiphase.
That's exactly right. Yes.
The main thing. So it's working in the same way effectively as like a noise cancelling headphone. Because I think a lot of people think, oh, this sounds too good to be true. It must be snake oil. Yeah. But I mean, I have a background in vibration engineering. I can confirm that there is
Yes.
engineering and science behind this. Like it does work.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it is basically just cancelling out vibration in the same way that we cancel noise with noise cancelling headphones.
Yes.
So you can tune it by tuning both the mass, the spring, and the damping coefficient, right?
Spot on. Yes. So the initial prototypes we built had kind of complex systems to damp the energy out of the system.
Okay.
We used like high-speed footage and accelerometers to record a bunch of data that we could then look at and fine-tune the specific frequencies we wanted to cancel out.
Okay.
Because something that like we learned through this process is that not all vibration is negative. We kind of ride our bikes by feel, right? So the speed in which we react to things on the trail tends to be a little bit subconscious. It's not really a thought-based thing. And so the vibrations that are passing through the bike are actually used to stay upright and maintain traction. And you need to know when to press into the tires and so on.
Yeah.
So if you were to design a product that would cancel out maybe the wrong feeling out of the bike, you would end up struggling to ride that bike as well.
Yeah.
So we wanted to make sure we were taking the negative aspects of the ride characteristic away and retaining the good stuff, basically.
Okay. Can you talk us through that testing process a little bit, like
absolutely.
how you went and worked out these things that you were going to go after?
Yeah, sure. So accelerometers were fitted to the handlebar and to the crown of the bike.
Yeah.
And we just did tons of usual riding, some racing, some regular riding, varying terrain. You collate all that data and do some really boring, nerdy MATLAB stuff where you do what's called a Fourier transform to kind of order the various vibrations on a graph, ranging from the most seen frequencies to the least.
Yeah.
And that gives you a kind of a good idea of how often everything happens when you're riding your bike.
Yeah.
overall.
And what sort of frequency range are you analysing here? Like,
So before I get into that,
Okay.
because we're going like almost too deep too quickly.
okay.
We also looked at high-speed footage and regular footage and compared that to rider feedback in conjunction with this data to find out where the riders were reporting, and myself, I was reporting the bike not feeling as good as it should. Let's say braking bumps, for example. And looked at the data to see what frequencies were occurring in that time.
Okay.
It turned out that the frequencies that were occurring the most weren't the ones that were the ones we needed to take out.
Okay. Yeah, they weren't detrimental.
They're the ones that are happening more often.
Yeah.
But they weren't necessarily the negative things. So we continued testing and trying to tune the mass damper to hit very specific frequencies. And doing so, we continued to collect more data. And looking at that data, we realized that our test mules were providing benefits across the entire spectrum as opposed to just in specific locations. So
Okay.
we didn't do the tuning part all that well, but we got kind of a really good, broadly beneficial product. And the feedback we were getting from the riders that used it was unanimously, this is great. This feels so much better. And it was kind of at that point we realized that whilst we were going down a rabbit hole trying to develop a tuned mass damper, we were developing a mass damper.
Okay.
One that takes energy from the system. So your front wheel is displaced and then your fork compresses, but some of the energy passes up through your crown and through your handlebars and you feel it. The mass has mass to it and it takes energy to displace it. So some of that energy is not going through your bars, but it's going through the mass and through the springs. So for a moment, the springs are capturing that force. You don't feel that force, and so you feel it as a smoother ride. We kind of realized that through all this testing that we had developed a product a lot like our chain damper, which we'll talk about later, that smooths out these kind of energy peaks and spreads them out over time. So although they're not necessarily damping them out of the system, kind of like your fork would, they are changing the way they interact with the rider. Human body's like really, really good at handling like slow forces, but really bad at handling really high intensity forces. Akin to me kind of shoving you versus punching you with the same level of total force. One would be a friendly push and the other one would, send me to jail. So we had kind of designed something that was smoothing out the way we interact with a range of frequencies. And we, at that point, just dropped the whole idea of tuning the device to a very specific frequency and saying every rider on Earth will benefit from that specific frequency. And instead went down the route of trying to make the mass damper as useful and as effective as we could based on that new knowledge. So as a kind of a tangent to that, we ship the product with multiple different spring rates. The idea behind that is to allow the mass to move its like greatest amount of travel it can, given the packaging constraints, without chattering off the end and bottoming out the device. But some riders are going to find that they're not able to induce that amount of energy in the mass in the product to bottom the device out. So the mass won't be traveling its full distance that it's capable of. Which means that the energy that is passing through the bike isn't as great, and so you need a lower spring rate to let the mass travel its full amount. And the reason we want it to travel that full amount is is very similar to a car's crumple zones. So the way car manufacturers design chassis is they build in crumple zones so that when you crash the car, the occupant is slowed down or decelerated at the slowest rate. The greater the crumple zone, the smoother that transition from very fast to very slow is, and the nicer it feels for the occupant. This is a lot like that, in that the mass needs to be slowed down as slow as possible, but over the greatest amount of time. So we need to gain full amount of travel out of the device. And if we just fit one set of springs and you kind of just carry on with that, then some users aren't going to be able to get the full amount out of it. Like you set your suspension to use up most of the travel most of the time. This is a lot like that. You're just trying to gain the kind of that balance between maximum amount of effectiveness without kind of chattering the device, basically. So yeah, long answer to a short question.
No, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. So tuned mass damper is maybe...
Absolutely. We, at that point, when we realized this, we were 2+ years into talking about the product publicly. We've been very open about the development of this all the way through, because we never actually intended to make a product out of it. It was mostly just a fun thing for us to do. And then we reached this point where, okay, this is a mass damper now. A lot like everything else on the market is similar. But everyone knows this as the Rimpact TMD at this point already. So we stuck with it.
Fair enough.
So we're sorry if we're misleading a lot of people, but it still works really well.
And so, and also damping obviously is a part of a tuned mass damper system, and that's part of the way that you one of the levers that you pull to tune the thing. In this, there's no specific like attempt to damp it, right? But there is friction in the system in the way that the mass moves.
We've minimized friction as best we can. We use some Igus bushes to kind of reduce that as far as like reasonable. There's also an element of trying to make the device cheap to install on your bike. If it was a really high-tech suspension component, the kind of the volumes that a smaller company is going to be doing it's not going to be affordable for people. But it's also got to be simple. Like, I hate servicing my bike. Like, I appreciate some people do like it, and there's some enjoyment out of it, but I want to ride my bike on the weekends and spend time with my family and develop cool products, not like remove grease from things, right? So we wanted to make it as like maintenance free as possible. So we find a product that does most of what we set out to do, does it way better than we ever intended it to do it, and is effectively service free. So we're really happy with that. Like,
That's perfect. And it fits inside the steer tube of the bike, which is a really nice touch, right? A lot of the products that we've seen on the World Cup circuit, not all of them, but they've been external fitted and kind of look a bit janky, I guess, but you've utilised that space in the steer tube.
Yeah, from day one, that was always the intention. I didn't like the idea of sticking something on the outside of the bike, strapping it to the bike in some way that could, it could collide with the rest of the bike if you crashed, or it could cause some damage, or even just moving added weight to an area of the bike that affects the ride dynamics. The steer tube sits somewhere roughly between your handlebars and your rear axle. So when you pivot the bike, it's sort of on that plane, and that means that pitching the bike left to right, kind of linking turns, don't really notice this added weight on the bike. The only time you do is when you're trying to float the front end over things in this kind of a subtle way, but you learn to adapt to that really quickly. And then the benefits that it provides, the ride characteristics, outweighs those small negatives. The device weighs like 420 grams.
Okay.
And that's not taking into account the star nut, the top cap, and the stem bolt that you would have had, the top cap bolt you would have had removed to install this. So talking about 370 grams or something. And as a percentage of total system weight, like I'm like 70 kilos, bike's probably about 20 kilos at this point. We're talking like less than a single % difference in weight. If you say you're noticing that on the climbs and on a full day out, you're stretching the truth a little bit, I think. I'm not saying that if you had it on an XC bike, for example, or a very, very lightweight enduro bike, you wouldn't notice this difference, but we think that the way it feels under descent outstrips that entirely.
Yeah. And so what does the data show? Like, what kind of frequency range do you find it has that benefit of, I guess, just taking the edge off the peaks, right? It's making the waveform that we would feel less harsh by.
So the crazy thing about this is it works across all frequency spectrum. Right. So if you plot two rides on a graph, two runs on a graph with and without the device, it just sits a little bit below everywhere.
Okay.
Which means that you just constantly reap benefits, and they stack. So across, let's say, 7 runs in a day, you are significantly fresher. Your mental load has been lower all day. Physical load has been slightly lower. So you're just less fatigued because the small percentages stack and stack and stack all throughout the day.
Yeah.
So rather than thinking of it as this very specific area of a certain track I'll benefit from and ever else I won't, it just is constantly helping you. That said, going back to what I said about the human body being really good at taking certain types of forces and not very good at others, this will help most when things are very jarring, so to speak. So the higher the amplitude of those peaks, the greater effect this is going to have. The lower, the more kind of like low end chatter is going to help, but you don't struggle as much with that stuff. So you don't get the benefit as much. So,
makes sense. And you've done a lot of testing, not just yourselves, but you've put it into people's bikes and done blind testing. You've done testing with the equivalent mass, but without the spring system in as well. Can you talk us through kind of the testing you've done and the results that you've had with people?
Sure. So one of the things we picked up on very early on is that we're adding mass to our bikes. Is the addition of mass giving us the benefit that we think we're feeling from the mechanical advantage that the device is supposed to give us?
Yeah.
So to put that in simple terms, if we were to put a placebo version in our bikes that weighed an identical amount but couldn't oscillate in any way, would we get the same results? Turns out the answer is no. But the way we achieved knowing that, or the way we learned that, was we took our very early versions, concealed them inside a solid tube, like an aluminium tube, used identical weights to ensure that both were indistinguishable from each other, and locked the actuation of one of them out. So if you holding two in your hand, you couldn't tell the difference between which one's which. You had to like number them in order to ensure that we kept track of which was which. And we had like 20 different sets of these units, and we sent them out to loads of different riders. One group received them and knew what a mass damper was and knew what we were trying to do. And we asked them to do lots and lots of runs on a track they knew really well. One that they weren't likely to gain time over the course of a day just by warming up. And then we sent them to another group of riders that had no idea what we'd sent them, didn't know what we were working on at the time, and asked them to just do A/B runs over and over and over again. Mix up the order. So some days they're going to do BB, AA, AB, and so on. Some days they were going to ride without it in and do a C run, and so on. So lots and lots of runs. We massed well over 120 runs doing this. Got all the data back from them, asked for their feedback on a run-by-run basis as well. And we were actually kind of shocked at the results. I didn't expect what we got, so it was almost too good to be true in some ways. The feedback was always spot on. I think nobody ever got it wrong. They always could tell what they had in the device versus in the bike versus what they didn't. So they identified the placebo versus not really quickly.
Okay.
So it provided some kind of real world benefit in terms of like rider feel. It definitely made the bike ride different in some way that they could feel very quickly.
Yeah.
The times were astonishing as well. So we had every single run of that block of testing, other than one single run, was faster with the TMDs installed versus not having the TMD installed or the placebo version. On average, it was 1 second per minute faster.
Okay.
Which again seems too good to be true. We're talking a sport where we fight over a tenth of a second.
Yeah.
And you put a very simple looking device in the bike and suddenly you're a second faster on a track, seemed too good to be true. But we do the same run back to back. I myself, Bike Park Wells, racing down, I think, Roots Maneuver.
Yeah.
So something like a 3-minute run.
Yeah, pretty long track for
and
the UK.
Every single time, hit all the same lines, tried to not do anything like wild on some runs versus others.
Yeah.
Made sure that I had a clear air in front of me, no traffic. And it was just, you stop the clock and just be annoyed that it was so consistently different.
Yeah.
119 out of 120 runs, faster by an average of 1 second per minute. And that was well over 10 test riders doing this.
Okay.
120 runs to like verify this. And I'm not saying this is like scientifically rigorous or not making any claims in that regard. But from my perspective, it really backed up that what we had like designed was providing a real world benefit.
Yeah.
And we weren't selling or trying to sell something that was just mentally changing the way you approach riding your bike to make you go faster, but instead actually physically changing the way the bike worked so you went faster. And those two things can be kind of identical. It doesn't really matter if you go faster, but we kind of managed to separate them out through that sort of testing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Good effort. And I had the chance to spend a day using one. I did a full day at an uplift spot near here on a track that I know very well. I've ridden many, many times, which is a mixture of like bike parky turns, some braking bumps, and then some quite rough, rocky, like janky would be over exaggerating it, but definitely like sharp edged hits. So I did 4 runs just to kind of get up to speed because I'd not ridden the bike. So I did it on Santa Cruz Nomad on an enduro bike. I hadn't ridden that bike for a little while, so I did 4 runs to get up to speed and get comfortable and familiar. I should say I didn't put any timing out. I didn't have an accurate enough way to measure timing. So this was all based on feel. And then installed the TMD with the medium spring, which is what it comes with, I think. And my immediate feel was that I had more front end grip and more confidence in the front end, which I thought was interesting, and I'll come back to that. The second thing which became obvious once things got rough, or more obvious definitely when things got rough, was that damped feel. Like I guess it's easy to say it's damped right as a damper, but it takes, like you say, everything that would feel sharp felt less sharp. So there's a particular rock section where you come through and it like patters over, and then there's quite a big hole and a rock almost facing you as you exit, and you always feel like that impact is harsh, and especially later in the day, it's one of those ones where you're like, am I going to lose my hands off the handlebars this run because I'm getting a bit tired? And that you could definitely feel, especially there, like it being a less severe impact. So yeah, it was a no-brainer, like first run, that this thing feels better, more damped through all of the rough stuff.
Brilliant. That's really good to hear.
Which was good.
You're talking about the compression spikes is kind of how I refer to it internally. So you hit, let's say, like a tree trunk sized root on the entrance to a corner, or a very specifically deep braking rut.
Yeah.
The plotted on a graph, that would be a very sharp spike.
Yeah.
And the TMD seems to work to lower that initial spike, and then also, instead of it being an oscillating line after that trailing off to nothing, it's more of a gentle curve.
Okay.
And again, going back to that analogy of being like gently pushed versus being punched, it's so much easier to deal with as a rider. And what you've done is you've turned the volume down on your bike ride, so you can drop into that like flow state a bit better. You can focus on what you're doing because you just don't have as much of that like subconscious mental load going on to ride the bike. You can just enjoy it a bit more. So.
Yeah. And would you say it makes it easier for the suspension to deal with?
Not really, no.
It's still doing the same job.
This is sitting above your suspension.
Yeah.
This is working independently of that.
Yeah.
We get a number of people say, if you set your suspension up right, you don't need this, for example. And that's not the case, because we're getting feedback from a handful of the kind of pro riders that we support on the circuit. Feels great, they're saying. They know how to set the suspension up. They've had significant amounts of help from Fox Factory and RockShox and so on, and Öhlins, and they all report the same sort of thing. Yeah. So it's not part of the suspension system, even though it sits in that same line, if that makes sense.
I would 100% say if you haven't got your suspension dialed in, that's the first place you need to go.
Absolutely, yeah.
But this will make any bike better. Like, even if your suspension is poorly set up, your bike will feel better with this in.
Yes,
if
definitely.
Your bike's perfectly set up, this will still make your bike feel better with it in.
Definitely. And the riders that haven't set the suspension up will probably benefit from this just an equal amount to the people that have, but the people that haven't set suspension up, just go and set your suspension up properly. It will make so much difference. If you're struggling with anything from like confidence fatigue, just not going as fast as you think, not having as much fun as you think you should, it's all just your suspension. Just go and sort it out, it does
make a very
but
very
this will certainly
difference.
help. Just a nice little drop in on top of that to like raise the game again.
Yeah, for sure. So I did 3-ish runs, I think, with the medium spring set up on, consistent feel across all of those. And then at lunchtime, I swapped down to the soft spring, because I wasn't having any bottom out on the spring. I should note, there's not any like massive impacts on this track. There's some harsh impacts, but there's no like huge drops or big sends or anything like that. So I swapped down to the softer spring, and admittedly over a lunch break, so the uplift stops for an hour or so, and so maybe I've lost that back-to-back feeling a little bit. I couldn't feel the difference personally between the medium spring and the soft spring, so I don't know. So
the device won't, or it shouldn't really change how effective it is as you go up spring rate, because those springs still have, as long as you're not bottoming out them out, they still should have like the ability to capture all of that energy that you can throw at it effectively. The mass is a finite mass. It's not changing when you change those springs. So the energy is captured from the system. It's just how effectively it's captured, I guess.
Okay.
So run the softest springs you can until you start noticing that negative, and then just go up a spring rate in the areas where you find that you need the stiffer spring, rather than just chucking the stiffest ones on and going, for example. Quite often you see some riders run very, very stiff suspension because stiffer is faster, right? and although that's not always the case, there's a rough rule of thumb that stiffer suspension tends to be a little bit faster. But in this case, the stiffest springs aren't necessarily the best. Just run the softest ones you can get away with without the negative feelings creeping in.
Yeah, so on that track I was okay on the softest set of springs. But yeah, for me, with that lunch break, I should say, in between, it wasn't super noticeable. I don't think, if you'd have blind tested me the medium versus the soft spring, pretty sure I couldn't have told you what I was on. If you blind tested me with the device in and the device out, I'm pretty confident I could have told you every run what I was riding. I then took it out to go back to a run, and the change in damping was very obvious. Like, it was back to being a lot more spiky in that respect and less comfortable of a ride. What I didn't feel go away was that front end grip confidence feeling. So I'm wondering if the TMD had helped me learn to trust the track, and then I've come back taking that out, but I've got that, I've programmed into my head that I can ride this turn at this speed, and therefore I'm just going to carry on doing that. So
absolutely. I mean,
think that one was a little bit harder to understand for me.
We've all ridden behind people that are better than themselves, and realized I can hit that corner way faster than I've ever done before, because I followed someone into it accidentally at that speed. You know, it's kind of like unlocking that confidence level. And, you know, if you can put something in and unlock it from like the first run rather than the sixth run, then just brilliant, right? Yeah,
100%. So for me, it was a no-brainer. It went straight back in after that run with it out, that it's better. It's a more damped feeling. There's less input, less jarring input coming through the bike. And I'd have been intrigued to see the times, because I don't know, when the bike feels slower effectively, it's really hard for me, at least, to know how fast I'm actually going. So one day we'll have to do some timing with it and see accurately where we're at. But it sounds like from everything you've learned that I probably was a bit faster on those runs as well.
Yeah, I mean, if your bike's feeling like it's going slower, it's doing less stuff, so to speak, it should just allow you to push the bike harder, right?
Yeah.
Like, always push it until it feels uncontrollable. And that's the way I ride my bike anyway. And so, yeah, if you're raising that headroom, you're able to push to a higher point, then you should end up going faster. So
yeah, interesting. So who would you see like owning one of these devices? We should pick it up, actually. There you go.
Yeah. So this is the device. Nearly everyone.
Okay.
So if you describe yourself as a poodler, you know, you just go to the local trail center and you poodle around the tracks, you're probably going to benefit from this actually a lot, because you're probably someone who death grips a bit more than they should, who doesn't ride as like smoothly, brakes in the wrong locations, hits kind of the rougher stuff by mistake, hasn't built up maybe the resilience in their body over years and years of mountain biking. You'll gain benefits from that, right? And you'll enjoy your bike ride more. You'll want to stay on the bike for longer each day. You'll impress your mates by going faster. There's just like no downsides to that, right?
Yeah.
But then if you're one of the fastest guys in the world, you've optimized everything to the point where the only area you think you can find time is through like fitness gains or repetition, and like you're riding at your skin basically. Well, this is something that doesn't currently exist on the market as an option for you to add to your bike to make you faster. If you buy a stock bike off the shelf, you don't have one of these in. So this is a plug and play boost to that. So it fits everyone in that whole spectrum. We can all benefit from it. I wouldn't put it on an XC bike. It's not for that type of customer. And indeed, if you're doing 100-kilometer trail ride days, it's not for you. But I've got it in my bike every weekend for 50-kilometer winch and plummet style enduro rides.
Yeah.
I don't really like struggle with that. So yeah.
Happy days. And it's a pretty easy fit, right? You have to take the star nut out of the steer tube, which can either be done via skill or brute force, as I discovered. Yeah. And then you've got one bolt to cut to length, basically, and away you go.
And it kind of works like one of those old Hope head doctors. Yeah. Just compresses the headset that way. And if you want to swap it from bike to bike, you may need a different connection bolt just to allow it to fit every single bike, but
Yeah.
it should kind of go with you from bike to bike to bike over the years, because as I said, it doesn't really have any service interval or degradation to it, and because it's not like a structural component like a handlebar would be, it's not going to fatigue over time and cause you issues. So you got years on this thing. So
Yeah. Ace. And I'm guessing you've got some of the world's best either running it or testing it at the moment.
Jesse sent our engineer a text the other day, Melamed,
Okay.
saying he likes TMD.
That's good.
I think that's a good enough one. But we're supporting the Scott team this year. We're supporting like actually a range of teams, but in different kind of products. So some teams have, let's say, a SRAM sponsorship, so we're not able to get some of our products on their bike because of sponsorship conflicts, but we're completely giving all of our products to the Scott team, for example. So Ethan Craik reached out to us saying he wanted to run our products. He tried some of them previously, really liked them. We don't pay them to run them, they choose to run them.
Okay, nice.
Adam Brayton, for example, another guy who liked the look of them, really wanted to try it, tried it, loved it. Johan Brelli, etc. I can name drop a lot, but one of my like crowning achievements from running this brand and like the products we've kind of released is hearing from guys I respect that I cannot fathom how fast they can ride a bike and how good they are at it, telling me that stuff that we've worked on, our hard work, is making them enjoy riding bikes more, right? So
that's very cool, man. That is very cool.
Yeah.
And on the World Cup circuit, we're seeing people on some teams with the external version of the device, not a Rimpact product, but we're seeing it used in different areas as well, right? Some people have got it up on the head tube, so I guess it's similar theory to the way you guys operate, although yours obviously tucks in the steerer. We've seen like Dakota running it basically on the end of the rear axle. Any thoughts on other areas on the bikes that could be a benefit? Do you see why they're doing that?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. There's certainly a benefit to all of those. When we started the project, the reasoning for putting it where we put it was A, the discrete nature of putting it inside the bike, really nice. B, the front end is what is like passing a lot of the vibration through the body. You're kind of dragging the rear wheel over things, and so some of that force is lost through the suspension in a more effective manner than the front suspension is like driven into the forces. So we felt that there was bigger gains from the front end compared with the rear.
Makes sense.
Putting on the bottom bracket's going to obviously lower that weight, so it'll change the ride characteristics of the bike, but I would argue that it's a lot more difficult for that device to provide great benefits in terms of what we're aiming at, which is vibration reduction and smoothness out of the bike. And instead it's probably more about the ride characteristic of the bike down there. And then if you put it on the swing arm, what it's doing is changing the amount of force required to get a given amount of suspension movement. So when the rear wheel smashes into stuff, that force input, it has to be higher for you to feel it to the same level as it would when the rear wheel's lighter, which is a really difficult thing to reconcile with sprung and unsprung weight. It's a different podcast entirely.
Okay, fair enough. But I'm assuming we're going to see more of this technology, in your opinion, right, across many bikes.
I think so. At first, like before we got to the point where we'd done a lot of this testing and realized the genuine benefits of it, and I was just doing it as a passion project, I thought it was one of those fizzle out products. But the more I've got feedback from the people that have got their hands on the first batch of these before they sold out, and the more teams that are trying to bite our hands off to get stock when we don't even have it ready for the World Cup season this year, the more I'm realizing that there's like longer legs to this, and I've already got a bunch of ideas on how we can look at improving this effectiveness and making it more specific for different disciplines and so on, and nice to live with. So yeah, watch the space.
Super interesting. And you talk about this idea of, creating products that give people confidence. And I looked at your race results actually while I was prepping for this, and it looks like over the years the products you've created for yourself effectively have helped you, right? It looks like you've got faster. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah. they certainly did. I used the TMD, like the prototype one I've got just here, for the Transmodera, for the second iteration, and I took the top spot in the open men category on that one. So I definitely went home thinking that could have given me some benefit. Could have all been me. I don't know. But yeah, over the years I've found that things like the tire inserts and these newer products provide me with a bit more confidence, but mostly it's removing that kind of mental load so that when I am between the tape, I'm more consistent. And so the results kind of then start to come through as a result of that, you know, being more consistent and not as like fatigued. Typically I would struggle with staying on the bike at the end of a long day as opposed to the overall speed. So
fair.
But I'm certainly not a top level racer. Those guys are something else.
It's insane, eh? Nice one. Well, it's been super fun chatting and really interesting to try the products. So thanks for sending those across. If people want to find out more or get their hands on them, where are the best places for them to be looking? Straight
to our website. You'll be able to either purchase them directly from us, you'll be able to chat to me directly, or my colleague Tristan. We're both very knowledgeable about the products, hopefully. And there's like a dealer and distributor section of that website as well, so you can pick them up pretty much all over the world at this point, or nearly. And if you can't, and you know a distributor in that area, get them to get in touch, because we're expanding rapidly.
Nice. And what's the website?
rimpactmtb.com. Just go on Google and type in Rimpact.
Perfect.
It says on my jumper for the video viewers.
Nice. I shall stick links in the show notes. Is there a social media like Instagram and stuff as well?
Yeah, at rimpactmtb.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, mate. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.